So, good afternoon. Welcome to the third lecture of the Apheleia conference series. Today with Dr. Giuseppe di Capua from Italy, which is a geologist and senior technologist at Istituto Nazionale di Geofisica e Vulcanologia. Let me present you during some time Dr. Di Capua, who is a co-founder, Secretary General, and Treasurer of the International Association for Promoting Geoethics, Treasurer of the Commission on Geoethics of the International Union of Geological Sciences, member of the Executive Committee of International Council for Philosophy and Human Sciences, and is also member of the chair of this institution on geoethics. Is co-founder of the School on Geoethics and Natural Issues, a member of the editorial board of the Spring Briefing Geoethics series, the Journal of Geoethics and Social Geosciences, and Geoconservation Research. He has served as a member of International Advisory Board on European projects Intermin, Smart Exploration, and CIRAN. He is author of books and articles on geoethics in international journals and co-author of the Cape Town Statement on Geoethics. So, Dr. Di Capua today will speak about geoethics and the polycrisis, navigating humanity's role in shaping a responsible future. So, when you are ready, welcome to this series of lectures. The stage is yours. And thank you very much for being present here in this lecture.
Thank you, Fernando, for this introduction. And I will share my screen with my slides. Let me know if they are working or not. Okay, I think that you can see my slides. So good afternoon, morning, everywhere you are. And first of all, I wish to thank Professor Luiz Osterberg for his kind invitation to deliver a talk in the Apheleia's conferences series. And it's a great honor for me to contribute to the discussion within this cultural initiative. Thank you, Fernando, for introducing me. And I want to add that from 2008 in my institute, I decided to shift my research activity on a more complex and fascinating field that is geoethics. Because at the beginning, I was involved mainly on activity related to seismic hazard studies. But I decided to shift to geoethics because first, I have been always attracted by interdisciplinarity, and geoethics is a field which converge many disciplines, geosciences, philosophy, economics, sociology, history, and others. And secondly, I believe the severity of the global social ecological crisis compels everyone to take action and personally to ask new questions, challenge increasingly outdated ways of thinking, and propose new paths forward. In my view, scientists are being called to an unprecedented level of social commitment. It is no longer enough to conduct research, publish studies, and only speak at conferences. We must embrace activism, improve communication with the public, engage in dialogue with policymakers, and even if it requires taking radical actions. The era of science believing itself to be neutral on ethical and social justice issues is over. Doing science is inherently a political act, carrying profound implications for human lives. So my talk is divided into two parts. In the first part, I will deal with the characteristics of the planetary human niche, providing some reflections about the current socio-ecological crisis or polycrisis. And today, we are living in a time of polycrisis where environmental, social, political, and economic aspects interact producing a cumulative effect of instability. And this will be my focus on the first part of my speech. In the second part, I will focus on the essential characteristics of geoethics, because I believe that geoethics can serve as a catalyst for driving the change and to contribute facing the polycrisis from its foundations. So we can start from the part one. We live in a globalized world. The globalized society is a real object made up of infrastructural networks through which mass and energy flows move on the ground, on the water, in the atmosphere of the planet to support human communities. And these dense networks form the anthroposphere and are articulated into systems of commercial, digital, tourism, military, industrial, cultural, social relations, which allow rapid transfers of tangible and intangible assets, consisting of technologies, goods, ideas, symbols, languages, worldviews, as well as fears and hopes. And in our time, this phenomenon of interdependence has assumed a dimension and a pervasiveness without equal in history, and has produced a globalization of needs, expectations, and demands through a process that, nevertheless, the French philosopher Edgar Morin defines as without solidarity. And both due to the close connection between the parties and the speed of transfer within the networks, the pandemic like the SARS-CoV-2 and the war in Ukraine, as well as the more recent tragic events in the Middle East, have demonstrated the vulnerability of our globalized society to local perturbations. And by local perturbations, I mean events such as a war, a volcanic eruption, a pandemic, an accident involving technological infrastructures, a coup, or a financial crisis. And human communities, supply or value chains, connection networks are just some of the elements that make up the human ecological niche. That is the space that human beings are continuously shaping incessantly from thousands of years, at least 14,000 of years, together or in contrast with the nature, in order to inhabit the Earth system, modifying, often unconsciously, ecosystem and social ecological dynamics according to complex mechanisms in a continuous action-reaction dyad. And climate change is only one of the ongoing colossal anthropogenic processes of planetary modification of the human niche. Anthropogenic modifications of the natural environment extend beyond impacting geoecosystems, which are ensembles of biotic and abiotic systems. They also influence human relations, altering their evolutionary trajectories, leading to further environmental changes. And while continuous adaptation to persistent imbalances is a natural process, the business as usual approach has accelerated this process. As a result, human-induced changes in the Earth system now appear to occur much faster than the human capacity to adapt to changing external environmental conditions. And this situation may render humanity unable to cope with the induced environmental changes, creating a dangerous biocidal loop. It seems that only through sudden and providential scientific discoveries and technological advancements, we can hope to interrupt this dangerous loop. If we refer to another French philosopher, Michel Serres, humanity has evolved from being prey in the natural world to becoming its apex predator. And however, in the near future, the great human-induced planetary geophysical upwells risk making humanity succumb, making it go back to being a prey in nature. In Western culture, the dichotomy existing between human beings and nature has very ancient origins, like highlighted by Giuseppe Capra. For some, it may highlight a form of deviance of the human species from an alleged ecological harmony, which is reflected in the myth of wilderness. However, it is reasonable to think that the dominance of selfish attitudes of the individual and of human groups, which have their own also evolutionary justification, over time has led human beings to a vision of the other from themselves as an object to be dominated and not as the subject of a relationship to be built to guarantee one's existence within a systemic interdependence. The use of technology by humans has gradually become an exercise of omnipotence, the exaltation of human domination over a nature, perceived as a constant threat to be kept at bay to control its dynamics. The German philosopher Gunther Anders cautioned us that technology was now a subject of history. And the geologist Peter Huff identified the technosphere an autonomous and self-evolving organism over time. The technosphere has begun this process of self-evolution and is leading us towards conditions of gradual dependence on the replacement of our species. The divide between humans and nature appears to have widened to the extent that it distances human beings from their own humanity. And this is evident in the extreme case of the creation of virtual life within the metaverse, that is a collection of virtual spaces where individuals are integrated and personified through avatars. In this digital dimension, people interact, establish relationships, and act essentially forsaking their physical biological existence. And in this process, there is a dematerialization of the connection with physical places and a compression of human experiences timeline into the present. The causal links between natural phenomena dissolve as their dynamics often unfold over extended periods beyond the common human perception. And in this indefinite and fluid reality, disconnected from both space and time, humans find themselves living in abstraction, lacking a connection to the material, tangible aspects of nature. Sensory perceptions of phenomena and interactions with places, ecosystems, geodiversity and biodiversity become scarce. And as Michel Serres suggests, it can be said that we have lost the word, although sudden events like war can briefly reawaken our connection to the materiality of existence, unfortunately. Technological development has been both the effect and the cause of this change in the life of humanity. Technology continues to oscillate constantly between two polarities. On the one hand, it is the extraordinary tool produced by human creativity at the service of the material and cultural development of our societies. On the other hand, it is a formidable picklock capable of undermining the authentic humanity of the human being and favoring their engineered homogenizations. We can call this as the suborganizations of the human being. Implementing that will to power and prevarication of the human over the human. An example is the atomic bomb, and of the human of nature, as occurs in the alteration of the biogeochemical cycles and more in general of the entire Earth system. Ever since the end of the 70s of the last century for the German philosopher Hans Jonas, was clear that technology without ethics was a risk for humanity. Jonas calls upon society to a new commitment, that of worrying about the consequences of technological developments for future generations. And the principal responsibility is the proposal to anchor human action to an ethical criterion in a technologized world, thus releasing it from an operational logic forced on the present. For Jonas, modern human capacities to manipulate the planet with destructive effects, even in the long term, require an action whose consequences allow the continuity of human life on Earth and therefore of future generations. Jonas, therefore, questions two fundamental pillars of Western culture. The first is the belief in the positivity of the future, closely tied to the idea of time as linear. And this is a perspective rooted in the Judeo-Christian vision of life. The second is the concept of individual utilitarianism, also linked to a religious worldview that prioritized the individual over the community. And Jonas warns against an overly optimistic view of technology, which rather than serving as a driving force for progress, can become a vehicle for the collapse of human civilization. And moreover, he urges us to adopt a development model that considers future generations shifting the focus away from individualism and the immediate present in favor of intergenerational solidarity. It is evident that the ontological fracture between human being and nature should find a solution. The ecological crisis or the polycrisis cannot be faced only with science and technology, as well as the crisis management cannot be delegated exclusively to those political, economic, and financial elites that often caused it. The socio-ecological crisis has a profound impact on the entire globalized society and therefore require responses from the global human community through the sharing of knowledge, experiences, proposals, ideas, and techniques. The ontological fracture of the human being from nature has its extreme results the strengthening of omnipotent attitudes in the individual and in human groups. And this translates into an inability by human being to understand the other than oneself, into the debasement of the environment, into the pursuit of profit and of possession as the central nucleus of gratification of an existence, which is centered on accumulation for the selfish satisfactions of one's interests. And the profound impact on individuals culminates in the manifestation of what Rosi Braidotti called as a cognitive capitalism, that is a system that profits from the knowledge and the capitalization of all living matter. The planetary primacy of the capitalist economic model can be framed within this split between human beings and nature. And the cultural problem, though it originated in the Western world, has now spread across the entire planet through the networks that I showed at the beginning of my speech. We need to come to terms with it. Today, planetary environmental issues have finally been included among the political issues to be debated at the highest level of governments, albeit severely slowed down by other geopolitical and economic issues or some particular political election. But the beginning of a real modification of the economic, financial, social, cultural, and political paradigms responsible for the excessive anthropogenic pressure on the environment and the deterioration of ecosystems still seems far away. The actions implemented by the states to change the development trajectory are insufficient, mostly dictated by wait-and-see logics that seems to hope for future-saving interventions of scientific research and technology, rather than starting the construction of a more sustainable and just future. In this situation, what might the future hold for us? And science has provided various scenarios. For example, the IPCC, that is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations, has outlined possible outcomes. What now seems certain is that our children will live in a world that is, on average, warmer than the one we inhabit today. And our grandchildren will experience an even hotter Earth. This is not just a matter of temperature or perception or discomfort. It is about habitability of our planet. Many regions of the planet have never faced such conditions, at least not in recorded history. And significantly, higher temperature will lead to social, political, and economic upwells that we are certainly unable to predict. One day, a friend of mine that is a well-educated, intelligent person who follows world events with a strong scientific background, say to me, but what's the problem if the world becomes warmer? Maybe Siberia will become cultivable and people will move there to live comfortably. This seemingly common sense remark actually reveals a complete disconnection from the reality of the situation. What he suggests might be plausible if global warming were happening much more slowly, if geopolitical conditions were different or evolved gradually over time, or if nation states did not exist, and so on. But do you see how naive or perhaps even foolish, if not outright deceptive, and politically manipulative, the objection, what's the problem if the Earth gets warmer, really is? Now let's try a simple exercise and let's outline 3 possible future scenarios for humanity. The dystopian scenario. This scenario is marked by these images are created with artificial intelligence to be in line with what I've said before, is marked by inaction or weak responses from governing elites, leading to a gradual systemic collapse and worsening socio-environmental conditions. It follows a business as usual approach where nationalist policies hinder short-term greenhouse gas reductions. Billions face rising temperatures, while food production remains a major emission source due to minimal improvement in practices and waste reduction. Environmental degradation and biodiversity loss continue, heightening risks like pandemics, conflicts, and water shortages. Industry and finance shift slowly towards more sustainable practices, but worsening climate change drives large-scale solar geoengineering and carbon removal efforts. And the risk in this case of systemic collapse grows as technological interventions, increasingly necessary yet unpredictable, may trigger unforeseen environmental and socio-economic consequences. The second scenario is the reality scenario that involves a slow but accelerating evolutionary process with lasting environmental impacts. Initially, weak and uncoordinated government actions persist despite scientific warnings. Over time, worsening crises, coastal flooding or heat waves, droughts, pandemics, extreme weather, and climate-driven migration force stronger international responses. And rapid emissions reductions, a shift to low-waste economies, sustainable food production, fossil-free mobility, and ethical finance emerge. However, uncertainty remains as reinforcing feedback loops could trigger a hothouse Earth scenario. And while solar geoengineering is avoided due to risks, some carbon dioxide removal technologies operate under strict United Nations regulations within an ethical and legal framework. Future generations will likely face a significantly warmer Earth. And the utopian scenario that is defined by rapid, coordinated action that mitigates environmental change. It requires radical culture, economic, political, and social shifts, driven by strong international leadership and global public support. Education plays a key role in fostering responsible, scientifically informed citizens with a global ethics. A permanent moratorium on armed conflicts allows resources to be redirected toward environmental and social policies. International cooperation leads to large-scale rewilding, zero greenhouse gas emissions, and a circular economy with near-complete recycling. The food system undergoes a global transformation. Geoscience becomes a valued social asset, guiding sustainable land management. Self-sufficient, nature-based communities thrive beyond urban centers, integrating past and indigenous knowledge. Ultimately, humanity not only stabilized the climate, but also start to build a safe and just space, balancing environmental and social needs. It seems clear to me that we are very far from this last perspective. The most realistic scenario currently on our horizon is likely the reality scenario, I hope. Moreover, we acknowledge that human history has also been marked by periods of regression, we have reason for concerns. This means that the probability of a dystopian biocidal loop occurring is increasing. And after all, none of us truly want to question the model that structures our lives, that comfort zone that reassures us yet traps us in stereotypes, even when that way of life is no longer functional or may even be fatal. We cannot place all the blame on the elites, politicians, and powerful entities. Regrettably, the current polycrisis is a serious threat that is scientifically documented. On closer inspection, is primarily a crisis of the human being, what we call an anthropocrisis, a crisis of civilization, especially of the Western one, fueled by two factors. The irresponsibility of the ruling classes in pursuing development goals without considering the environment and social inequalities is evident, but also the lack of responsibility among individuals actively participating in processes of mass consumption toward shared issues is fueled by a culture of success that promotes selfishness without balancing it with solidarity. In this complex framework, ethics must be rethought as an indispensable tool on which to base the regeneration of human society, to make it more inclusive, equitable, peaceful, socially supportive, and ecological oriented in its choices. In the geoethical vision, these regeneration projects must be based on the individual as advocated by Edgar Morin. The individual is the quantum of social construction, the fundamental particle that can become a conscious and not forced source of that spirit of solidarity that must unite humanity in the search for a more responsible, just, and respectful way of life towards human beings and the environment. But allow me also a moment of pessimism, which I need to balance, at least in part, with my optimism. I'm always struck by the words of the renowned Italian philosopher Umberto Galimberti, who argues that in a world entirely dominated by technology, driven only by its own self-perpetuation and offering no deeper meaning to human existence, ethics risk becoming something merely pathetic. But I start again with my optimism. Let's outline 9 essential points about the polycrisis that should guide our proposal to address it more effectively. And in the second part, I will start with the contribution that I and other colleagues are trying to give in facing this polycrisis. First point, the socio-ecological crisis is a planetary issue that will develop over several generations. Point 2, geoscientific knowledge is an indispensable tool for managing the functioning of modern globalized societies and poorly considered in the decision-making processes. Human communities need adequate geoscientific literacy, since geosciences can help redefine the relationships between humans and nature on the basis of some scientific discoveries that outline their philosophical value for human life by modifying the perception that humans have of their interaction with other non-human entities. And I'm talking about deep time, the systemic dimension of planetary relationships characterized by feedback loops processes, the grandeur and power of geophysical phenomena that is linked to the beauty of nature. And geosciences have the power to reconnect us with the materiality of life, even through the simple observation of physical phenomena. The point three, humanity does not consider planetary boundaries and systemic sustainability thresholds in building their own living space, the anthroposphere. The point four, over the next few decades, the persistent overcoming of ecological tipping points will induce substantial changes to the Earth system, which could prove incompatible with maintaining the planet's habitability for the human species. The point five, the anthroposphere has now come to coincide with the physical limits of the planet, and consequently, the human ethical dimension, space, has also expanded to a planetary dimension. The socio-ecological crisis, this is the point six, is also the effect of the enormous political, economic, and social imbalances existing on Earth, are the gradients. And facing it in a conscious and effective way implies having to reconsider at the same time political structures, economic models of reference, social issues, and relationships between states. There are inequalities in human access to resources, both nationally and internationally, which fuel this polycrisis, and that the polycrisis in turn affects. The point seven, solutions to global problems can only be sought through widespread international cooperation. Global anthropogenic changes do not know boundaries. The point eight, there is no effective action to find answers to the complexity of social ecological problems that does not consider multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary approaches. And finally, the search for answers and common solutions presupposes the development of a planetary consciousness shared by the various human communities through the creation of a reference framework of ethical principles and values on which to base the sense of belonging to a community of destiny, like said by Morin. By community of destiny, we mean that dimension of solidarity, sharing, that will allow humanity to build the future of human life on the planet through new ethical and educational assumptions. After this first part, now I pass to the second part, in which I will focus mainly on geoethics as a proposal to face the polycrisis, one of the elements that could contribute to face the polycrisis. So, geoethics developed with the aim of redefining the human Earth system nexus, proposes a reference framework of principles and values to face the current global challenges, which can be shared at the transnational level. The polycrisis requires a renewed awareness in the human abilities to create new models of interaction between humans and between humanity and nature. And this implies a radical analysis of what it actually means to mediate between different interests and needs, without this leading to the creation of unbalanced relationships guided exclusively by the exercise of dominion by the strongest actors. Geoethics has been defined as a field of theoretical and applied ethics focused on studies related to human Earth system nexus, Geoethics is the research and reflection of principles and values which underpin appropriate behaviors and practices wherever human activities interact with the Earth system, deals with ways of creating a global ethics framework for guiding individual and social behaviors while considering human relational domains, plurality of human needs and visions, planetary boundaries, and geo-ecological tipping points. And finally, this is a part more focused on geosciences, deals with the ethical, social, and cultural implications of geoscience knowledge, education, research, practice, and communication, and with the social role and responsibility of geoscientists. So, a distinctive feature of geoethics is that it is centered on the human agent, who is placed at the center of an ethical reference system based on three fundamental principles: dignity, freedom, and responsibility. Dignity is expressed by recognizing the intrinsic value of all the elements that make up social ecological systems and presupposes respect for oneself and for the other from oneself. Dignity is to value one's own being and what is other than oneself. It implies the sense and intrinsic necessity of the other, whether it be animal, plant, or rock. Therefore, in geoethics, it takes place in the recognition of the value of an entity in the relational architecture that constitutes the ecosystem to which it belongs, and by extension, to the Earth system. Freedom is the fundamental requirement, the necessary prerequisite for the human agent to be able to choose and therefore act ethically. It represents the existential condition thanks to which the human being is able to think, process, and choose without external constraints that limit their intellectual and decision-making abilities. Responsibility is the ethical criterion that guides the action of the human agent, who accepts their role within the Earth system and takes into account the possible consequences, even negative ones, of their actions. Human beings, as complex beings, have a responsibility to act in accordance with their complex biological, emotional, and rational nature. The principle of responsibility supports human action within the different levels of relationships of the human being, identified in geoethics as domains of experience of the individuals: the self, the social group or groups to which each of us belong, including those professionals, society and future generations, the physical environment. And these levels become consecutively larger, more complex, and intricate as the sphere of action relationship of each individual widens. So geoethics establishes a unity of human action in the various relational domains. The individual assumes a duty towards himself, towards others, and progressively towards wider spheres of interaction, up to including the whole Earth system. Through this evolutionary process, in a certain sense, geoethics urges each individual to embrace and become part of the whole, acknowledging the indissoluble uniqueness of every human being and their connection with the physical environment. Perceiving oneself at the center of one's existence is not a selfish attitude in this case. It does not imply dominance over others, as seen in the traditional anthropocentric vision. On the contrary, it expresses our authenticity as human beings and recognize our shared identity with the species. This identity is based on how we perceive and understand the world from an anthropocentric perspective, similar to the concept that Morens defines as terrestrial identity. By acknowledging this, we can value things beyond ourselves, embracing a broader perspective beyond our individual perceptions. Geoethics is characterized as an ethics of individual virtue, in which the modus vivendi is articulated through the incorporation into practice of cultural, social, and environmental values, among them sustainability, adaptation, prevention, education to geo-environmental culture, and scientific method. Geoethics emphasizing the need for establishing common principles and values of reference for individuals, since their social interaction and community organizations cannot be ignored. The principle of responsibility is the bridge that binds the cultivation of virtues to the development of a solid moral character on the part of individual in the vast context of the relationships in which each of us is immersed. And therefore, geoethics is at the same time an ethics of virtue and an ethics of responsibility of the human agent, since it implies on the part of the individual who is striving for virtuous action, the consideration of the consequences of his or her action in a system of complex relationships that will inevitably be modified by his or her choices. And the principle of responsibility, on the other hand, qualifies the action of the individual in the social ecological context of agency. The human being as a moral subject is entrusted with the task of addressing the planetary ecological crisis through the awareness of the need to change their ways of relating to the planet, to its resources, and other biotic and abiotic entities that constitute it. Ultimately, geoethics is the proposal for global ethics of the complexity of the modern world, an ethics of virtue and responsibility, but also an ethics of limits and parsimony. Geoethics, therefore, proposes a synthetic vision for the human beings, which we define ecological humanism, which seeks to grasp the complexity of human emotions and actions while reconciling contrasts. This vision incorporates the concept for anthropocentrism, biocentrism, and ecocentrism, geocentrism into a unified perspective, preserving the valuable aspects of environmental ethics categories and utilizing them to foster a new dimension of human relationships. In this vision, the human beings are characterized as follows: intrinsically and perceptively anthropocentric, as they cannot escape the human nature, the forms of their thought, the biological, emotional, and rational complexity through which they give meaning to their perceptions and reflections and construct their vision of existence on the basis of human species peculiarities. But also dynamically anthropogenic, since human beings build their ecological niche to create an operational space which they modify, if necessary, to try to improve their living conditions. But in the context of geoethical thought, human beings should also evolve, or must also evolve, to become relational biocentric in the recognition of the value of the life of any living being, and ecocentric in the attitude of respect towards the complexity of the web of ecosystemic interactions and the human role of pares inter pares. Identitarily geocentric when they develop a sense of supranational belonging to terrestrial citizenship. So, what should we do? Some advocate for ecological radicalism. I'm thinking of Arne Ness and his concept of deep ecology, while others propose revisiting the ideas of historical figures who introduced powerful innovations in Western culture, for example, such as St. Francis and his concept of brotherhood, which extend beyond humanity to embrace all forms of life. Without the regeneration, and surely this is fundamental for me, without the regeneration of the human being, the polycrisis, or as called by Morin, risk leading the Earth system to a sudden and irrecoverable rupture, since everything that does not regenerate degenerate, as Edgar Morin says. In my own small way, I believe geoethics can offer some opportunities. Of course, we cannot know what the future holds for humanity. But we can and must question the structures that define our present and create the conditions necessary to build an ideological alternative to the current way of life. After all, the future of the Earth may be more predictable than that of humanity and might not include humans at all if we don't change. Many thanks for the attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Giuseppe di Capua. I noticed that there is a question on YouTube.
Oh, yes.
I will read to you. The question is the letters are very tiny. I have to approach. So, can you hear me well?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so here is the question by Nuno Guimarães da Costa. How to solve the paradox faced by many local, regional, and unfortunately a growing number of national and global level decision makers and politicians between short-term social pressures. And he adds a comment, for instances, in employment and longer-term ecological and environmental needs. I think that this is the question. Shall I repeat?
Yes. I think that I understood. I see that also that I don't know if in chat you put this. Yes.
It's not in the.
Okay, Professor
okay.
Guimarães. Yes.
Ask him to put. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Oh yes, and unfortunately, this is in line of what I've said. That if our decision makers don't change, it's impossible for us to change the world. It is a very complex matter, and unfortunately, those decision makers especially in some important countries, are voted by us or by some part of the public opinion. And so it's unfortunately, if we don't become aware of this, I think that this could create a very great problem. First of all, because as Latour said, the French philosopher that died last year, if I don't remember bad, a new sort of fight between classes now will be among different generations, because between younger people that are more aware of this crisis at a global level, and our decision makers, and that is a sort of gerontocratic power that is managing the current time not in a very responsible way. Unfortunately, I think that we must, that in many countries we have just a way to do this, we have to vote the right people. I know that that sometimes this cannot be easy, but we should do this. We have to try to involve ourselves more in, as I said also, and I say this also to our colleague, our scientists, but there are a lot of young scientists that are aware of this. They should be involved directly also in society, in talking with society, with decision makers, and say that we should change. But it's not easy, especially because now the society is mainly driven by technology, and this is a threat in some ways, more than opportunities that is given.
So thank you. I see that there is here raised hand. Luis Osterbeck, do you want to say something?
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, Fernando, and thank you, Giuseppe, for this wonderful lecture that you gave. I have two questions for you, but first let me also say that I believe that this project on geoethics is really very important. It builds from a tradition of series of reflections on these issues, as you mentioned, Ancionas and Gamohan and others. But I think you have been able to develop tools to implement that with the IAPG, with the chair and so on. So I think it's very important initiative. I also liked very much your slides. They're very beautiful. I envy the slides. But let me make a comment on something which triggered a reaction on me. When you showed the slides on dystopia, I was actually looking at my computer and I was watching the screen because we are having a big screen here. And I thought it resonated to me as ruins, as in an archaeological site. And actually, I thought it would be something like the Babylon of Bruegel, the painting. And when I saw your slide on Utopia, I saw no heritage. So my feeling in the end was it's a hard choice to have a future without a past or a future with a destroyed present. Anyway, this is the joke. The questions are these. You discussed the issue of the divide between nature and culture, which of course is an important issue. Would you agree that the notion of landscape in a sense bridges the two and offers a path to overcome the divide, allowing people to look at the so-called nature as part of themselves, as part of their conditions of life, in a more anthropic sense, if you wish. And the other question is, do you think that for Europeans in particular, and Northern Hemisphere people maybe, the growing discussions about redefining frontiers, which was an issue until a few years ago, restricted to the south. But then we had Ukraine. Of course, we have the issues in the Middle East, Northern Africa, and now there's a discussion about Greenland and Denmark. Do you think that this would trigger a greater awareness of what is in stake from the perspective of people, thus reinforcing a convergence towards a more geoethical understanding? Thank you.
Luisa, I'm completely in agreement with you that landscape is fundamental. For example, Silvia Peppoloni, that is the founder of, in a certain sense, of this challenge of geoethics, put the territory, what we call territory, at the basis of the possibility to reconnect us with the materiality also of our experience. And because the territory and has inside all elements coming from biotic and abiotic aspects and human aspects. So in this sense, and also put us in connection with the history of the territory, the vocation of this of the land, and so on. So this is fundamental, and there are a lot of initiatives from this sense. Also, maybe in Italy, but also I think in Portugal, in some other countries, also in Europe, this is evident. It's evident that the landscape we see is was strongly modified by humans, but was created in a sort of co-creation with nature. And this is a very important experience, especially in the where this was done in a sort of positive way. So this is very important. Regarding the second part of your questions. I think that's the power of the most important actors on the geopolitical scene is in the hands of people, of old people. That's unfortunately people old in the sense that they are thinking in a very old way. Unfortunately, in this way, we cannot go ahead in something different that what we have done till now. So, in this moment, it's very difficult to see a more positive future, and in a certain sense, also this is in line with what I say before about the sort of struggle between two ways that are emerging, or one is the dominant one that is a old way of thinking, and the younger way that is rising. But unfortunately, these new ways of thinking is coming too much slow, in a very very slow way, and so we should create more opportunities to fasten this process through education. This is fundamental, unfortunately, and education is the key. We have still a couple of generations ahead before really a possible collapse of a systemic collapse. And so we are still in the possibility to change profoundly, in a radical way, the way of thinking our relationship with the planet. In this moment, yes, I understand that we can have some particular concerns and some decision makers. I see, for example, what is occurring in on the other part of the Atlantic Ocean is not encouraging on this sense.
So thank you very much. I see here another hand raised. Harold Snoersen, can you have your micro turned?
Okay. Harold, you are a philosopher, so please consider that I'm a geoscientist.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for this really excellent presentation. I learned so much from it, and I thought you were bringing things together, in such a lucid way and helpful way. I had a little trouble with the audio at the very beginning, so I missed maybe the first 5 or so minutes, and you were in that time, I think, making some explicit references to the impact of artificial intelligence. So my question, maybe you've already addressed some of it in those first few minutes, but I missed it, unfortunately. I wanted to also give a shout out, thanking you for your, as you usually do, references to the pioneering work of my teacher Hans Jonas and his efforts to articulate a principle of responsibility and the need to ground that idea of responsibility in a kind of metaphysical or ontological basis, which of course raises the very, very big question of, how is it that we connect this kind of thinking to current political realities? Anyway, my specific question is I noticed that you really didn't do an explicit critique of capital. And it seems to me that you can't, talk about the impact of technology without recognizing how contemporary technology is really the handmaiden of capitalism, and the efforts to promote sort of a technological solution that, people like Peter Thiel and so on advocate is very much based on a kind of unfettered capitalism of pure greed and the idea that private ownership is going to solve the problems of humanity. So it seems to me that in trying to develop a principle of responsibility, there needs to also be a sense of what the limits of capitalism ought to be. I wonder if geoethics offers anything along those lines. Thank you so much.
Harold, I think that you have touched one of the more critical points, because there is a strict connection between from, as I say, the religious ways to approach in the Western countries from the beginning of the Christian world, the scientific revolution, the affirmation of the capitalistic model, capitalistic economy, and the technological developments. These are all links to a way to think, to see the future in a positive way, and so the time in a linear way. And so now we are working for tomorrow, and tomorrow and the future will be surely better than today. This has brought us towards a very critical point, despite history as teach us that we have several times of great regressions in which really we touch the worst thing we do. You think to the Nazism, for example, and but now this is another point. So we are touching another very critical point, which is the alternative. I don't know. Geoethics in these moments is, in my opinion, can contribute to something different. Surely there are also some economic, some colleagues that are working in, are expert on economic models, are trying to develop something different, also looking at geoethics. But it's very complicated to develop something that is alternative to this way of thinking that is dominated these current times. Very, very complicated. If I say that, okay, please take geoethics and your life will be better. I say, maybe I put myself in the same line of what have been done in the past, and with the same approach, that is a linear approach. I think that we should be very critical about what we are doing now, and this is the first step, obviously, but not. I'm also aware that being aware doesn't mean to act in a more correct way. You should put in this also your emotion, your spiritual dimension. We need a lot. So I think that we really should work on the educational level in a more deep way, and continuing to develop, for example, the theoretical framework of geoethics, and also applying it as we are doing in some concrete experiences. Like, for example, I don't know if you know the geoparks movements, in which there are colleagues that are working in a very important initiatives that is at the international level, in which they create new ways also to relate to own territory and also to economic activities, but activities that take into account local communities, that are co-creating with local communities, and look at the environment in a very responsible way. This experience could be a sort of geoetical communities in a certain sense, because they apply in a very concrete way what we say in geoethics. So there are some lights and many, many shadows.
Thank you very much. We have another question from this way from Brazil. But if I may, I would like to say very fast that I enjoyed very much this lecture. And I would like to quote Eastern traditions when they say that when the student is ready, the master appears. So this means that we have to create inside ourselves this position for responsibility, for many other things, and things can work better. So that's it. And I will pass to the next question from Roberto from Univalde, Brazil. And the question is this. Regarding polycrisis, what do you think about the power of social misinformation?
The power of social misinformation is immense, and we know well. And we have a movie that I can cite for you. That is it's a famous boat cruise that was the Poseidon, in which in the moment of this film you have few people that are survivors in the boat that was sank, that is going in a different direction compared to the most of people that is going towards the worst direction. It seems that what are doing those few people is the worst thing, but they are in the right direction to change their life and to survive to this end. The same thing. If we want to believe to social misinformation, we are free, especially in our democratic countries, but this will lead to our destruction. We have to choose.
So thank you very much. This has been very interesting. I wonder if someone else is to say something more, but we largely passed the time. And I remember that people can see the ones that didn't manage to see this lecture, they can see it recorded as soon as possible. And if there is no other question, I thank Dr. Giuseppe di CAPUA. It was really very interesting. It was my first relation with geoethics. I'm fascinated. And I'm an archaeologist, by the way. But it was very interesting. And thank you again. And
thanks to you. Thanks to you.
If nobody else wants to add something, the organizers of Apheleia, Luis and Nuno, want to add something else? I don't see any reaction. Now we close. So Nuno is saying that we close. So thanks again. Thank you very much. And let's hope for a better future.
Yes, I hope.
Yes,
Thank
okay.
you.